I was spending the weekend alone at our remote cabin while my husband was away on a business trip. It was supposed to be a relaxing retreat. Just me, a stack of books, and the quiet serenity of the woods surrounding me. As the evening drew in, the gentle rustle of leaves and distant calls of nocturnal animals were soothing, the perfect backdrop for unwinding. But as the darkness deepened, the ambience shifted. The once comforting solitude of the woods seemed to grow heavier, filled with unspoken whispers. As I prepared for bed, a sudden crunch of gravel outside jolted me from my tranquility. Initially, I rationalized it as wildlife. A raccoon, perhaps, or a deer. However, when the slow, deliberate footsteps continued, a knot of fear tightened in my stomach. Peering out the window, I could just make out shapes moving in the shadowy fringes of the cabin's exterior lighting. The sight sent a cold shiver down my spine. It was unmistakable. I was not alone out here. My mind raced as I considered my options. The nearest neighbors were miles away, unreachable in any immediate sense, and the police were even further. For a moment, I thought about dismissing it as my imagination, but the growing audacity of the visitor, who now seemed to be circling the cabin, exploring its vulnerabilities, propelled me into action. I wanted to call for help but hesitated, fearing it might just be a false alarm. Frozen with indecision, I sat in the enveloping darkness, listening as the footsteps grew closer, now accompanied by a faint tapping on the windows and a subtle jiggling of the door handle. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs, each new sound amplifying my dread. It was then that I remembered. The gun. My husband had mentioned leaving his gun in the cabin, a precaution tucked away in a closet for unlikely emergencies such as this. Although I was not accustomed to handling firearms, the growing threat outside left me with little choice. With trembling hands, I retrieved the weapon, its metal cold and solid in my grip. I checked it was loaded, my fingers fumbling in the unfamiliar task. As I steeled myself to face the window again, to identify the intruder, the noises abruptly stopped. The sudden silence was almost more terrifying than the noises themselves. Heart pounding. I strained to hear more, but there was nothing, just the eerie calm of the forest night. I spent what felt like an eternity clutching the gun, every nerve on edge, until exhaustion finally overtook my adrenaline. I collapsed into bed, the gun within reach, sleep a distant afterthought. Dawn light eventually crept through the curtains, revealing a peaceful scene outside that belied the terror of the night before. When my husband returned, I recounted the events, my voice shaky with the lingering fear. Concerned, he immediately contacted the police, insisting on a thorough check. The officers arrived and conducted a sweep of the area, but found no evidence of an intruder. No footprints, no disturbed earth, nothing except for a strange, inexplicable marking beneath the window, an unfamiliar symbol that seemed to have been deliberately drawn in the dirt. The police documented everything, but had little to offer in way of explanation. They suggested it might have been someone lost or confused, made harmless by my lack of engagement. But the symbol remained unexplained, a mysterious reminder of the night's reality. As life returned to normal, the cabin felt different to me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened, something that might remain forever unresolved. The incident taught me the importance of always being prepared and never underestimating the value of trusting one's instincts. The gun, a last resort that thankfully remained unused, was a stark reminder that sometimes, The mere presence of protection is enough to stave off unseen dangers. I live in a small village in the countryside of Oregon. It's a quiet place, mostly known for its farms and friendly neighbors. Nothing much happens here, especially anything scary or dangerous. My home is a cozy house where I stay with my mom and my younger brother, Alex, who's 16. I'm Mike, and I was 13 when all of this scary stuff happened about a year ago. My mom and Alex had to drive to a city a few hours away to pick up some relatives from the airport. They decided to spend the night in a hotel because driving back in the dark wasn't something they were comfortable with. Even though I was just 13, I'm pretty tall and strong for my age, standing at 5'11", and weighing around 170 pounds, which is not common for boys my age in our village. Now let me get into what happened that night. I was in my room playing a video game called Brawlhalla, and suddenly I felt hungry. I decided to head downstairs to the kitchen to grab some food. Our house is designed in such a way that as you walk down the stairs, you can see the living room, the kitchen, and the windows that face the backyard. As I was walking down, I started hearing a scratching sound. We have 4 cats, and they often make such noises, so I didn't pay much attention to it at first. However, as I passed by the window near our front door, I noticed something odd through the blinds. Considering it was around 10 or 11 at night, the sight of someone outside the window was startling. I felt uneasy about checking it out, so I quickly locked the door and rushed back to my room. My bedroom has a large window, and the roof outside is not too high, about 15 feet up, with a generator placed right beneath it. It's pretty easy to climb up there. I've done it a couple of times. After returning to my room and starting to eat while watching TV, I heard a tapping sound. I muted the TV, trying to figure out where the noise was coming from. It seemed to be coming from my window. Cautiously, I approached and peeked outside. At first glance, I saw nothing. But then, I spotted someone lurking close to my window on the roof. I recoiled instantly. The person was wearing a black hoodie, making it impossible to see their face. I quickly grabbed my phone and texted my mom, telling her someone was on our roof, tapping at my window. She replied urgently, telling me to make sure all the doors and windows were locked and to call 911 if anything else happened. The night grew deeper, and I tried to settle down for sleep, playing some music to calm my nerves. But just as I was about to drift off, I heard the front door opening. Confusion washed over me since my mom and Alex weren't due back yet. I turned off my music and listened intently, hearing footsteps moving around downstairs, scared and unsure. I quickly closed and locked my bedroom door. For some reason, I didn't think to call the police right away. Instead, I tried to call my mom, but she didn't pick up. I hesitated to call the police because I thought maybe my mom and Alex had come back unexpectedly. But then, things took a terrifying turn. I heard a man's voice inside the house. He was speaking Spanish, a language no one in my family knows. My heart raced as fear took over. I rushed to hide in my closet, barely breathing, trying to make no sound. The footsteps grew louder, moving around the house, coming up the stairs, checking each room, and then, finally, entering mine. As the stranger moved around my room, I tried my hardest to stay silent. But in a moment of panic, I accidentally pushed something over. The noise was loud in the quiet room, and I knew he had heard it. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. The man approached the closet, laughing in a way that made my skin crawl. I realized that I had to make a choice, fight or run. Everything inside me screamed to act. So when he opened the closet door, I didn't hesitate. I charged at him, using every bit of strength I had to bring him down and lock him in a tight grip. It was a fierce battle. He was much bigger and stronger than me, but somehow I managed to overpower him. As soon as I felt him weaken, I released him and sprinted out of the house, running straight to my neighbor's place for help. My neighbors were quick to act, letting me in and calling the police for me. The officers arrived swiftly and entered our home. They found the man still inside and arrested him. Seeing him being led away in handcuffs, laughing at me with a disturbing look, made me feel sick. My mom rushed back home as soon as the police contacted her. I don't know what happened to that man after that night, and frankly, I don't ever want to know. The fear and the memory of his laugh still haunt me, reminding me of the night I faced a stranger in my own home. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel isolated. The area had no street lights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me, though. It made my little house feel even more serene on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke that was odd, as I had never smelled that before around the house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just got off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired, even though it wasn't even 7 yet. I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I had heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand, though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone screen blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9-something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footsteps as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leaped out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway. The one I was in a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God he did that. It gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop when they didn't see me in that room. They ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone were hiding, It would be in the bedroom because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be placed in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone while I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over. I assumed it was an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over. The sofa had been flipped. All the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and all the boxed and canned foods had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, though, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They'd also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil and an empty pan, which the police said people often used to smoke meth. So they think he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with family or friends that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple of hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and get motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up into the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at that house, though. I lived there another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even practiced doing that at my new place, except now I go to a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hall first. I had just finished another exhausting day of the office, and all I wanted was to get back to my condo and collapse into bed. As I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for my floor, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But that feeling didn't last long. As the elevator began its ascent, I caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of the door. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But when I looked closer, I saw a figure standing behind me, lurking in the shadows of the elevator. My heart skipped a beat as I spun around, but there was no one there. I told myself that I was just tired, that I was seeing things. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease as the elevator continued its slow climb, but the image of that mysterious figure lingered in the back of my mind. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see them standing there, watching me. When the elevator finally reached my floor, I practically sprinted out, eager to escape the confines of the small space. But as I stepped into the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I fumbled with my keys, my hand shaking as I tried to unlock the door to my condo. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside made me jump. I felt like a trapped animal, cornered and vulnerable. Finally, I managed to get the door open and practically threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I spent the next few days in a state of constant paranoia, jumping at every sound and suspicious of every stranger I passed on the street. I even contemplated moving out of my condo, convinced that whatever had been in that elevator with me was somehow connected to my home. But just when I was about to reach my breaking point, something happened that changed everything. I was leaving my condo one morning when I noticed a strange envelope shoved under my door. At first, I thought it was just junk mail, but when I picked it up, I saw that it had no return address. Just my name scrawled across the front in an unfamiliar handwriting. My heart raced as I tore open the envelope, my hands shaking. Inside was a single photograph, a grainy, blown-up still from a security camera. And in that photograph, clear as day, was the figure that had been lurking in the elevator with me that night. It was a man, his face obscured by shadows, but I would recognize that silhouette anywhere. Scribbled beneath the photograph were the words, "I'm watching you." In that moment, everything became clear. It wasn't just a random encounter. Someone was stalking me, tormenting me, and they wanted me to know it. I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, my stalker was long gone. They dusted for fingerprints, but the envelope had been meticulously wiped clean. It was like whoever was behind this was taunting me, leaving just enough clues to keep me on edge, but never revealing their true identity. The police stepped up patrols around my building, but it did little to ease my fears. I would lie awake at night, plagued by the image of that shadowy figure, wondering when, or if, they would strike again. Weeks turned into months, and still there was no sign of my stalker. Every creak in the night, every unexpected noise made my heart race with terror. I started seeing a therapist to help cope with the trauma, but nothing could shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I was never truly safe. Then, one night, everything changed. I was alone in my condo, trying in vain to fall asleep when I heard a noise coming from the living room. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me again. But then I heard it again. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, creeping closer and closer. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. This was it. The moment I had been dreading for months. My stalker was inside my home, and there was no one to save me. As the footsteps grew louder, I scrambled for something, anything, to defend myself with. My hands closed around a heavy lamp on my nightstand, and I gripped it tightly, my knuckles turning white. The door to my bedroom creaked open, And there he was, the figure from the elevator, his face still obscured by shadows. He moved towards me with a predatory grace, his footsteps barely making a sound on the carpet. I braced myself, ready to fight for my life. But just as he was about to reach me, the bedroom door flew open again, and a blinding light filled the room. Freeze. Police. In a flurry of movement, my stalker was tackled to the ground by a team of officers, their guns trained on him. As they wrestled him into handcuffs, I saw his face for the first time. A man I had never seen before, his eyes wild and crazed. It turns out that the police had been staking out my condo for weeks, using me as bait to lure out my stalker. The whole thing had been a carefully orchestrated sting operation, complete with a fake security camera photo and a hidden camera crew. As they hauled my stalker away, I collapsed to the floor, overcome with a wave of relief and disbelief. It was finally over. The nightmare that had consumed my life for months was at an end. In the days and weeks that followed, I learned the horrifying truth about my stalker, a deranged loner obsessed with me for reasons that still remain unclear. He had been watching me for months, plotting and planning his move, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. I don't know if I'll ever be able to truly shake the trauma of what happened, but at least I can take comfort in knowing that the monster that tormented me for so long is finally behind bars, where he can't hurt anyone else. And as for me, I've learned to appreciate the simple things in life. A good night's sleep, the freedom to walk outside without fear. Because in the end, that's all any of us can really hope for. A life free from the shadows of terror and obsession. My roommate was out of town for the week, leaving me alone for spring break. With no classes and no plans, I was set for a quiet week indoors, especially with a fierce storm raging through the city. A common but intense occurrence this time of year. The howling wind and relentless rain made it feel like the house itself might be swept away. Knowing sleep was an impossibility, I decided to stay up late gaming to pass the time. Around 11 p.m., amidst the noise of the storm, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Startled, I paused my game and approached the front door. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing but the storm's wrath. Curious and cautious, I opened the door only to be greeted by a blast of wind and rain. No one was there. It seemed absurd, but I wondered if the wind could trigger a doorbell. Returning to my game, I tried to refocus, but a loud crash from the backyard startled me again. I rushed to see our patio furniture thrown about by the gale. Braving the storm, I scrambled to secure the furniture against the house, battling the stinging rain. That's when I noticed a figure at the edge of the yard, watching me intently. I froze momentarily, meeting their gaze before hurrying back inside, unsettled but hoping it was just a shadow or a tree. The incident left me uneasy. Opting for the comfort of the living room, I settled on the couch with a blanket, too restless to head upstairs where the storm sounded even fiercer. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. I awoke later to an especially violent gust that shook the house. As I sat up, intending to check the backyard, my feet splashed into water. Shocked fully awake, I noticed puddles leading across the living room floor, marked by muddy shoe prints. Heart pounding, I traced the prints throughout the house, realizing the intruder had entered through the unlocked back door, which I had neglected in my rush earlier. Fearing the intruder might still be inside, I quietly secured the back door and called 911, my mind racing with possibilities. The police arrived and conducted a thorough search, finding no one and nothing amiss apart from the eerie shoe prints that came dangerously close to where I slept. The officers suggested it seemed like a targeted intrusion, yet nothing was stolen, and the intruder had made no move to harm me. Reflecting on this, I couldn't help but suspect my roommate. The unnerving possibility that this could have been more sinister had they been home was chilling. It seemed whoever it was knew my roommate was gone and had some connection to them, perhaps someone harboring a grudge or an obsession. As I dealt with the aftermath, the mystery lingered, a stark reminder of vulnerability and the hidden tensions that can lurk even in familiar spaces. I was just 14 years old, and it seemed like an ordinary night. It was roughly around 9:00 p.m. I was at my younger cousin's house, and I was babysitting for the night. Both of our parents had gone out for drinks and weren't going to be back until late. We were just lounging around, sitting in the living room, watching random shows on television. So we're sitting there, and I was feeling really unsettled. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I tried to ignore it and kept watching TV with my cousin, who was happily enjoying my company. The feeling wasn't going away, so I got up and walked to the back door to lock it. When I came back through the kitchen, I realized what was causing my weird feeling. In the window, there was a very decrepit and homeless-looking man just staring into the window, looking at my young cousin. Protective mode turned on. I pretended like I didn't see the guy. I told my little cousin that we needed to go upstairs because our parents would be home soon, and they wouldn't want him to be staying up late. I went upstairs and put him to bed, knowing damn well that there was a man outside that wanted to get in. At the time, I was about 125 pounds and 5'8", and I played football for my school. If I remember correctly, I went downstairs and straight into the kitchen and grabbed one of those meat tenderizing hammers. I turned back to the window where I saw him before. He wasn't there, so I ran back to the front door and checked that it was locked. Both the deadbolt and the knob were locked. I ran back upstairs with my meat tenderizer and went into my cousin's room and sat down in front of the door. He asked me what I was doing, and I said that he didn't need to worry about it and that he should keep his head low. I called the cops and then my dad and uncle. Cops said they would take half an hour and my dad and uncle were 45 minutes away. All of a sudden, I hear a window shatter and the sound of heavy boots walking around on the tiles. I told my cousin to stay calm and hide under the covers. I whispered to him that he needed to stay silent. I could hear the guy walking around downstairs. It was horrifying. I gripped the damn meat tender and waited. About 5 minutes passed, and then I hear the boots walking upstairs. At this point, I was having a freaking heart attack. My cousin's door is no more than 10 feet from the stairs. I heard him opening the doors to my uncle's room, then the bathroom. My cousin's door was next, along the hallway. I was shaking with adrenaline at this point. Suddenly, he decided to walk back downstairs, and I heard him open the door to the basement. 15 minutes later, the police showed up and burst into the house. They came up to our room, and I told them that I heard him go into the basement. They rushed down there and caught the guy without much fuss. It turned out the guy was loose from a mental hospital from the city about 20 miles away. He had the mental age of a child and had broken into a few other houses in the area. I had nightmares for months afterward. My mom and dad were leaving for a weekend trip, so it was up to me, a 15-year-old, to watch over my younger brothers. That day, a big storm was hitting our town, making everything outside look dark and scary. To have some fun and forget about the storm, we decided to play hide and seek in the house. In the middle of our game, I remember I hadn't taken our dog, Max, out to pee. I told my brothers I'd be quick and left them hiding. While Max and I were outside, I noticed a strange car parked by our house, close to the street. It was a dark car, possibly a Toyota, but I wasn't sure. The rain made it hard to see clearly, and I couldn't tell if someone was inside the car. Feeling uneasy, I hurried back inside, made sure all the doors were locked, and checked every window. I didn't mention the car to my brothers. I didn't want to scare them. Just after getting back in, my phone buzzed with an alert from our doorbell camera. Someone was at the front door. With the storm raging outside, it was odd for anyone to visit. I checked the video and saw a man, probably in his 50s, standing there. Suddenly, he looked right into the camera, his eyes wide open. It sent chills down my spine. I decided not to alarm my brothers. Instead, I suggested we play a quiet game where the quietest one would win a treat. Half an hour later, the man was gone from the camera's view. Still feeling worried but trying to stay strong, I peeked outside from each window. The mysterious car was still there, but there was no sign of the man. Then, I remembered I hadn't checked the sunroom yet. Our sunroom was different because you could see outside from any part of it, but that also meant anyone outside could easily see you. As I made my way to the sunroom, the feeling of dread grew. The thought of someone watching from the dark, stormy outside made every step feel heavier. This part of the house felt more exposed than any other, a perfect place for the stranger to have moved to, hidden from the rest of the world by the storm's cloak. When I dared to look through the window again, my eyes met with the man's, hiding behind our air conditioner. I was about to call the police when our eyes locked. I stumbled back in shock, quickly getting up to look again, but he had vanished. I rushed to gather my brothers, dialing 911 as I did. Suddenly, a loud banging on our front door echoed through the house. "I can see you," he shouted, his voice twisted and strange. He laughed darkly, hitting the door even harder. I ushered my brothers and our dog, Max, into the bathroom, whispering for them to be silent. I explained what was happening as I gently held Max's mouth to quiet his barks. Fear gripped me, fearing any noise might lead the man to us. In the cramped bathroom, the sound of our door being forced open filled the air, followed by the man's eerie laughter. The 911 operator assured me the police were on their way and urged us to stay hidden and quiet. The intruder, failing to find us, began rampaging through our house. The sounds of our belongings being smashed and broken were terrifying, but I forced myself to remain calm, painfully aware of how vulnerable we were without any means of defense. I whispered to the operator to ask the police to approach silently. The details blur together in my memory, but I remember hearing the man being restrained by the police. Peering out, I saw him handcuffed, struggling against the officers. Our home was in ruins. My parents cut their trip short and returned home to help us clean and recover from the ordeal. The fear of being alone at home still haunts me, and I doubt it will ever leave. I share this story as a warning. Always be cautious and never open your door to strangers. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong. I was around 16 years old at the time. It happened in the suburbs of New Jersey, about 8:00 p.m., and completely dark outside. I was alone in the apartment where my aunt and I lived on the 4th floor of a very old apartment building in a very tiny complex. The front doors to the stairwell were supposed to have buzzers and locks. That was a joke. They clearly hadn't been in operation since 1956. When you looked out the living room window, they looked down on the parking lot. The walls were paper thin, and the windows seemed to be single pane because you could hear everything going on out there. You could especially hear when a car arrived. It was second nature to look out the window at the sound of a car because, well, we're so nosy, I guess. That night, I heard the sound of a very loud pickup truck. My uncles lived just down the road, and both drove pickup trucks and visited regularly. So I got up to check the window to see if it was one of them. This time, it was not. It was a beat-up old Chevy truck with rust all over the place, and inside were 2 teenagers. The second I came to the window, the driver pointed straight at me, as though he absolutely knew who he was looking for and where I was. Now that freaked me the hell out, and I took a step back. I was about to walk into the other room and just tried to shake it off when there was a pounding on the apartment door. All I could think was, the hell. I walked over to the door as quietly as I could, trying to step on the rug and not the wood floor. I leaned to the door without touching it. I held my breath as I looked through the peephole. I couldn't believe what I was now seeing out there in the stairwell. 2 very agitated-looking teenage boys. They were twitchy and jumpy, clearly on something, and one of them was holding a Home Depot bucket. And here is where my brain must have snapped into some sort of dissociative panic mode that would come back to haunt me later. In the bucket, there was duct tape, a rope, a hammer, some wood, and a long serrated-looking knife, like the kind you use to cut spray foam to make it smooth. I pulled back from the door immediately. My brain was going 1000 mph for just the briefest of moments. I thought, there's no way this is real. There's no way they're just carrying a bucket of these murder tools right out in the open for me to see. It's so stupid. This has to be some sort of joke. Yeah, it has to be. I went to the people again to try to get a good look at them. I didn't recognize either one. Let me tell you how significant this was for me. I was pretty well liked in my high school. I moved between social groups very easily. I got along with everybody, and everybody got to know me. Part of this, I believe, is because I came into high school with my self-confidence guns blazing. I had spent horrific years in middle school being bullied relentlessly for being a lesbian. When I got to high school, I swore I would never let anyone use that weapon against me ever again. So on the first day of 9th grade, when it was time to get up and introduce ourselves in the class, I said, "Hi, my name is Lucy. I like girls." People were really impressed. They actually loved it. They loved how open I was, and they loved that they could ask me questions about anything. Looking back, part of me wonders if all my cocky confidence blinded me to the fact that perhaps I made myself a target. When I realized I didn't know either of these guys, and that they were not friends playing some kind of weird prank, my heart sank even further. Now, you would think the most common sense thing to do at this point would be to call the police. And you're right, it would be. But of course, that's not what I did. You see, I knew that if I called the police and my aunt found out about this, I would never have a moment to myself ever again. My aunt was already hyper-paranoid about child abductions, child molestation, Pretty much anything she could ever watch on a Lifetime movie turned into concrete fear for her every day. I can't tell you what it took to convince her that I, a 16-year-old, would be okay in an apartment by myself for a few hours in the evening. So of course, my selfish, stupid teenage brain put that in priority over, staying alive. Through the peephole, I could see that one of them had stopped bouncing and twitching long enough to slowly lean his head towards the door, trying to listen for movement inside. I knew this was my chance. The second his ear touched the door, I pulled my hand back and slammed the door right where his ear was and let out the deepest, most guttural shriek that I've ever made in my entire life. He fell backward. His friend tripped over him. They grabbed each other and started fumbling down the stairs. I got all the way to the floor and peeked through the very bottom blinds of the front window to see the truck peeling right out of there, tire smoking. Not one neighbor came out to see if I was okay. And I know they heard me. That was just as terrifying as the experience that I just had. I could hear on a regular basis when my neighbor to the left would sneeze too loudly, but none of them heard me screaming. Yeah, okay. I never saw those guys or that truck ever again. And despite how long I've made this story, the entire incident couldn't have taken more than 8 minutes from start to finish. I completely believe that seeing that bucket full of murder weapons was the moment my brain went into self-preservation mode. And because there was no aftermath, because there were no repercussions, because I didn't talk to this about anyone, it started to feel even less real. Time moved on. I questioned it over and over. Did this really happen to me? But I know it happened. It was just so damn weird and unexpected that my brain didn't have the neat little compartment to put it in. The pestering question is, why? Was it actually random? Or was it actually targeted, and they even knew that I was home? About 10 years ago, I lived on my own and didn't have much company. I was quite depressed at the time after losing my girlfriend to a drunk driver. I was enjoying drawing a beer and watching the sunset on the back porch when I saw a large, scruffy man emerging from the tree line. My heart skipped a beat as he stumbled towards my house in a menacing way. Living alone, I often used my backyard for target practice, and at that moment, I was immensely grateful for it. Instinctively, I rushed to bolt all the doors while frantically dialing the police. What I didn't know was that this intruder had broken in the day before through a basement window and had spent the night squatting there. He had left the basement door unlocked, and at this point, he made his way inside the house and was making his way up the stairs towards me. I gripped my rifle, aiming at the approaching man as he descended the hallway. I shouted at him, ordering him to stop and get on the ground, but he just kept walking towards me. I fired the first round loaded with rock salt, but he showed no reaction. I quickly followed with a rubber bullet to the chest, yet the drugged-up guy, who was clearly out of his mind, continued advancing. This guy was huge, at least twice my size, and I realized that whatever drugs he had in his body were going to push him through any pain that a rubber bullet would inflict. He was backing me into a corner. I desperately begged him to stop and warned him what would happen, but he just moaned at me like a zombie and shouted, "Shoot, do it." Then he launched towards me. I took my third shot. I can't recall whether it was buckshot or a slug, but it left a gaping hole in his chest. It barely even slowed him down. He kept coming. In a frenzied struggle, he wrestled me to the ground. He was moaning and coughing up blood. Suddenly, he grabbed my face with both of his massive hands, and started squeezing my head. It was utterly terrifying. I could feel him trying to burst my skull open like a balloon. I don't know how long it actually lasted, but it felt like forever. Eventually, the injury finally caught up with him, and he died on top of me. I lay there with him crushing me for a few minutes. My energy was completely drained, and I could barely breathe with his weight on top of me. His body was pushing my rifle into my chest, and it was causing me serious pain. While I tilted his body to the side, I was completely drenched in his blood, and I can still remember the overwhelming smell. I'd completely forgotten that I was still on the phone with the operator who had heard our entire exchange, which more or less amounted to me pleading, "Stop or I'll shoot," and the man menacingly taunting. The police arrived soon after, and the incident made it to the local papers. There was a criminal investigation, but eventually I was cleared of any wrongdoing. It turned out that the intruder was wanted for the murder of an elderly couple in Baltimore and had somehow made his way 50 miles up the road into our rural area. I've been thinking a lot about sharing my story of a time I was alone at home and felt really scared. It might not sound super scary to others, but for me, it was the first time I ever felt truly uncomfortable and not safe in my own place. This happened a few summers ago when I was in my early 20s. I was studying for my degree online and was working on an assignment one day when someone knocked on my apartment door. I opened the door and saw a man who said he was there to check the apartment for any damage. I live on the highest floor of my building, and the only way out is through the front door. I didn't feel stuck until something scary happened later. I did have some issues with my apartment because of heavy rain a while ago. It had damaged my walls and even caused a light in my ceiling to stop working. I told all this to the man, but he said he needed to come in and see for himself, so I let him in. I should mention I wasn't really dressed to meet someone. I had on a red nightgown, and I didn't realize it was on backward. Looking back, I think this might have led to what happened next. I took the man to my room to show him the damage, and I even let him take pictures. He had a strong accent that made it hard to understand him at times. While he was looking around, I called my mom to tell her about the unexpected visit. I was lying on my bed while talking to my mom, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the man was staring at me in a weird way. I didn't think much of it at the time because I was focused on my call. After I hung up, I showed him the rest of the apartment to check for more damage, which didn't take long. As I was showing him out, he made a comment about my body, asked how old I was, and then took out his phone. He wanted to take a picture with me, which made me feel really uncomfortable. I tried to cover myself with my arms, but he moved them away and even pulled down my nightgown a bit to take more photos. I was really scared but tried to act normal and told him he needed to leave. As I was trying to get him out, he asked for a kiss. I said no, but then he asked for a hug. I didn't know what to do, so I hugged him, and that's when he tried to kiss me. I managed to move away just in time, so he only touched the side of my mouth. I quickly said goodbye and locked the door. Then, I called a friend and told her everything. After the call with my friend, I felt a wave of anger and fear wash over me. This man had almost attacked me in my own home. I had faced unwanted touches on crowded trains and unwanted comments on the streets because of how I dressed before. Those times, I could just walk away from those scary people. But this was different. This happened in my home, where there's only one way out. That scared me even more. I called my mom next to tell her what had happened. She was really angry. She asked if the building manager was there when this happened. I told her no. It turned out that the man wasn't allowed to be in my apartment without the building manager. I felt sick to my stomach, so I ended the call with my mom because someone was knocking on my door again. The man had returned, and this time the building manager was with him. I had put on a hoodie by then, and just let them in without making a fuss. The man acted as if he didn't know me, and I was too upset and shocked to say anything. After they left, I talked to my mom again. She said we needed to keep the story straight, because when she and my dad got back, we were going to the police station to report what happened. And that's what we did. The police told me to write everything down and talk to the building manager. My mom spoke to the building manager before going to work the next day and told him everything. But the manager acted as if I was making it all up, saying that women often claim they were attacked when they're alone with a man and not dressed properly, so nothing was done about it. The man was just quietly moved to work in another building to prevent more problems like this. My family still lives in that apartment. It took me a long time to overcome the fear and anxiety that experience caused me, and to feel okay around my male friends and comfortable with myself again. Now, I ignore the building manager whenever he comes around. He has to tell my parents whenever someone is coming to inspect our apartment, because I refuse to be home alone for those visits. I'm an artist, and I often find myself working late into the night in my studio loft. There's something about the quiet darkness that inspires me, the way the shadows dance across the canvas, breathing life into my creations. But lately, I've been feeling like I'm not alone in the studio. It's a subtle feeling, a prickling at the back of my neck, that sends shivers down my spine. At first, I brush it off as my imagination running wild in the silence of the night. But as the feeling persists, I can't shake the sense that someone or something is watching me. I try to focus on my work, losing myself in the swirls of paint and the rhythmic strokes of my brush. But every now and then, I catch movement out of the corner of my eye, a fleeting glimpse of something or someone lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. It's unnerving, to say the least, but I try to push the feeling aside, telling myself that it's just my mind playing tricks on me in the darkness. But then one night, as I'm hunched over my canvas, lost in the flow of creation, I feel it, a presence in the room, heavy and oppressive, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I freeze, my heart pounding in my chest as I slowly turn around, expecting to see someone or something standing in the doorway. And there he is, a figure tall and shadowy, framed against the dim light of the hallway. For a moment, our eyes meet, and I'm paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. But then, in the blink of an eye, he's gone, disappearing into the darkness as if he was never there at all. I'm left standing there trembling and alone, the echoes of his presence lingering in the air like a ghost. I try to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light, that there's no one else in the studio with me. But deep down, I know the truth. I'm not alone. And whatever or whoever is watching me is not of this world. Terrified, I gather my courage and make my way to the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I peer out into the hallway. But there's no one there, just the empty expanse of the studio bathed in darkness. I want to run, to flee from this place, and never look back. But something holds me back. A nagging sense of curiosity that compels me to stay and confront whatever or whoever is haunting me. With trembling hands, I reach for my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dial 911, my voice shaking as I explain the situation to the operator on the other end. Within minutes, the police arrived, their voices echoing through the studio as they search for any sign of the intruder. But they find nothing, no trace of the man who was standing in the doorway, no evidence that anyone else was ever here. I'm left feeling shaken and vulnerable, my sense of safety shattered by the encounter. But as the police reassure me that they'll increase patrols in the area, I feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I'll be able to put this nightmare behind me and move on with my life. I'm house-sitting for a colleague while they're on sabbatical, and let me tell you, this place gives me the creeps. It's a sprawling Victorian mansion, old and creaky, with more rooms than I know what to do with. The first night was uneventful, but last night was something else. I was sitting in the living room, grading papers when I heard it. Footsteps echoing through the empty halls. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut somewhere upstairs. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself it was just the house settling, that old buildings make all sorts of weird noises. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I debated whether to investigate or just pretend like nothing happened and go back to my work. But curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself creeping up the stairs, my footsteps echoing through the silent house, every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, sending shivers down my spine. I felt like I was being watched, like there was something lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. I made my way down the dimly lit hallway, my heart racing with each step. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a door standing wide open at the end of the hallway, a faint light spilling out from within. I approached cautiously, my hand trembling as I reached out to push the door open further. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. The room was empty, but there was a chill in the air that sent goosebumps racing across my skin. I could feel eyes boring into me from every corner of the room, watching my every move. I wanted to run, to get out of there as fast as I could, but something kept me rooted to the spot. I felt like I was being drawn in, like there was something in that room that wanted me there. I mustered up every ounce of courage I had and stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The air grew colder with each passing second, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The footsteps, the slamming doors, all of it. It was like it had never happened. I stood there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I wanted to leave, to get out of there and never look back. But something compelled me to stay. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something in that house, something dark and sinister lurking just out of sight. I spent the rest of the night on edge, jumping at every little noise, every shadow that flickered across the walls. I tried to convince myself that it was all just my imagination, that there was a rational explanation for what had happened. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. When morning finally came, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I packed up my things and practically ran out the door, never to set foot in that house again. This all happened just recently in summer this year. I've been living with my parents until I had a good enough job to move out. About 9 months ago, I was finally ready to leave the nest. The place I found wasn't the nicest neighborhood, but it wasn't too bad. Some of my neighbors actually came over to welcome me and gave me some food. There was one neighbor, though, the guy who lived to the right of me, who wasn't exactly welcoming but immediately comfortable with me, like we had known each other for a long time. He'd seen me leaving for work in the morning and run out of his house to tell me random stories, like how the last neighbor used to always turn the bathroom light on at 3:00 a.m. and leave it on all night, or that they would sunbathe in the garden for 5 hours sometimes. It was all very random, boring facts, and I'd barely get a chance to react to his stories before he was asking me intrusive questions like, "Why did you leave for 83 minutes last night?" It's worth knowing that his voice was a bit odd. He spoke with a very particular inflection every time. He'd say something like an enthusiastic nerd, if that makes sense. Sometimes it made his statements sound like accusations, and sometimes it made them sound like questions, but my response to his comments was never really met with conversation. I would kind of laugh it off and just give him a short answer like, "I had to grab some groceries for tomorrow," but he'd be really quick to interrupt and remind me that the last neighbor never took 83 minutes to grab groceries, and he'd say it with an almost accusatory tone, like what I was saying was ridiculous. I assumed he was just a bit odd, and didn't call him out on his intrusive questions too much. This continued for weeks. He either ran out to come and question me about my day-to-day activity, or he'd come knocking at random hours to tell me facts about my life. He would tell me that he noticed that I left at 8:33 this morning instead of the usual 8:26. I had different ways of reacting to this, sometimes thanking him for letting me know, sometimes being rather dismissive, but always friendly. He was never interested in any other kind of conversation. He'd tell me his observations and then leave. The months went by, and his behavior continued. Almost every day, he'd stop me in the morning or come knocking to tell me something about his observations. He seemed harmless, so I just let him do his thing. One evening, while I was going for drinks across the road, I asked my neighbor if she ever had any issues with him. She paused almost immediately and looked at me with a serious expression. What happened? She seemed really worried when she asked me. I explained to her that he would approach me constantly to tell me that he'd seen me turning on specific lights in the house at night, or that he'd point out changes in my usual routine. Nothing terrifying, but still creepy. At this point, she turned the music off and put her glass down. "You need to be careful around him." She seemed disturbed, like I triggered a repressed memory. "The people who lived in that house before you were so sweet. I can't prove it, but I know that they're gone because of him." Gone? What did she mean, gone? I pushed her to tell me more, but she apologized and turned the music back on, changing the subject, ending the conversation. She did stop at one point to just make sure I locked my doors and not to invite him at any point that night. As I made my way back home, I watched his house closely as I crossed the road. It was noticeably dark. I never really paid much attention, but I don't think I ever saw his lights on after dark, whereas every other house on the street had at least a few lights in different rooms. I got to my door and paused. I looked towards his house one more time. I saw exactly what I was hoping not to, a glimpse of light. He was peeking at me. How long had he been watching the neighbor's house to know that I was over there? Was this all he did, watch me? I went inside and remembered what my neighbor said. How often did I not even think about locking the door? Honestly, I think most nights I wouldn't even check. I clicked the lock and made my way to the back door. I took the key from the side and made sure it was locked. I put the key back in its usual place and made my way upstairs. As I dressed down into my underwear and made my way under my covers, I reached over and turned off the lamp. It had been a long night, so I started to drift off quite fast. Did I hear that? Was that knocking? I sat on the side of my bed and waited, anticipating more knocks. About a minute passed, and I didn't hear any more knocking, so I assumed I just dreamt it. As I was half asleep, I lay back onto my bed and closed my eyes once again. No, I definitely heard something. I was in a weird state of being half asleep and a little bit tipsy, so I threw the light on and made my way to the window. I couldn't see anything or anyone outside. The sound of me opening my window was loud enough for any visitor to hear. I called out into the darkness, asking if anyone was there. At this point, any normal person would step into view and show themselves, but nobody reacted. Nothing. I knew that someone was knocking. I threw on my dressing gown and made my way downstairs. I went straight to the front door. It had shaded glass that let me see partially through it. There was clearly a figure standing in front of the door. I was freaking out, but I was also angry. I didn't even consider the danger. I started fumbling with the lock and threw the door open. You left your house for 157 minutes. What the hell? I snapped. This was the latest he ever visited. Everything about his behavior had really annoyed me. The fact that I called out of the window and he didn't respond, and instead stood with his nose practically touching my front door. Why did you feel the need to tell me that at this late in the night, I was falling asleep? You've been out very late. I know that. I'm an adult. I'm allowed to go out late. I realized I was reacting to his accusatory tone. Is that all you wanted to tell me? I've been out late. He started to just walk away back to his house. I yelled to him that I didn't want him to knock on my door again. He didn't react, just kept walking towards his house and went inside. I tolerated his weirdness for long enough. I convinced myself I wouldn't let him commentate my life schedule anymore, and that next time he talks to me, I was going to tell him I don't care and just keep walking. I closed the door and went straight back to bed, still frustrated with how intrusive and weird he was. I closed my eyes and imagined what I would say to him the next time I saw him. I felt really tired and had no problems getting back to sleep. As expected, I had the weirdest dream. Whenever I had a few drinks, I'd always have such vivid dreams. I could hear that damn gentle knocking. I didn't awake this time. I almost convinced my subconscious dream state to ignore the imaginary knocking, but I was fully aware of every creepy little thing that was happening. I started wondering if I'd locked the door. I knew I'd locked it earlier, but did not lock it up after I opened it again to confront him. I couldn't remember. I hated how realistic my dreams were. Of all the scenarios I could think about, did I really have to imagine him breaking into my house and walking up my stairs? I felt like I'd never been so consciously aware during any of my dreams. I was dreaming that I was locked in place, sleeping on my side with my back to the door. His breathing sounded so real. If it wasn't for the alcohol in my system, I would have definitely woken up. This was by far the creepiest dream I ever had. I dreamed that he was climbing into bed with me, wrapping his arm around my waist, and playing with my hair. I felt absolutely disgusted, but the soft touches also felt relaxing and pushed me deeper into the dream. I was urging myself to wake up at this point. My mind kept racing back to the thought that I actually hadn't locked the door. I needed to get up. His breathing was so intense. It felt so real. His touch felt real. This was unlike any dream I ever had. I was urging myself to wake up. I felt paralyzed. Wake up. Wake the hell up. My eyes finally opened, and I could still feel his touch. Why didn't you lock the door? I jumped up. His voice immediately jolted me awake. He was in my bed. I screamed and ran straight down the stairs and out into the night. I was still screaming as I ran across the road and started banging on my neighbor's door. I was freezing, only wearing my underwear and completely barefoot. I banged aggressively on her door and shouted her name until she came down. She opened the door in a daze, and I pushed my way in. I frantically explained what had happened whilst begging her to lock the door and call the police. We watched out of the window. My front door was wide open, just as I'd left it. The cops were on their way, and my friend was comforting me as I got into some of her clothes and told her all of the details. Minutes passed as we stared out of that window. My friend asked if I was sure he was there, and it wasn't just a bad dream. I started to doubt myself when we didn't see him leaving. I wasn't the sensitive type. I wouldn't make up that whole scenario out of fear. I had a vivid memory of him lying in bed with me and touching me and talking to me. It was real. I know it was. The cops showed up after about 15 minutes and started to enter the house, guns drawn. We watched intently, waiting for them to bring him out in cuffs. They were in there for quite a while, and I started to think that he locked himself in my room or something. After what felt like forever, the cops started to leave my house. They were alone. He wasn't with them. I couldn't believe it. I was not crazy. He was in my house. I know he was. I made my way outside to speak to the cops and ask where he was, but they confirmed that they found nothing and searched everywhere. I frantically told them that I was not going back into the house with him still in there. That's when the worst thing that could have happened. He walked out of his house. He stood there, just watching. I was freaking out, demanding that they arrest him and insisting that he was in my house. His expression didn't change. He didn't even flinch. He just turned and walked back inside. Yes, I was drunk, and I was pretty emotional at this point, but I couldn't believe that they didn't listen to me. They told me that they'd searched the entire place, and there was no intruder. They said that the person who I claimed was an intruder was clearly in their own home, so I should just go inside and get some sleep. There were no signs of forced entry and no damage or evidence of an intruder, so there was nothing they could do. After a while, me practically begging them to at least go and interview him. One officer did go over and speak to him, but it seemed like a very short conversation. He confirmed that he did come over initially to check on me as I looked drunk, but then went straight home. I was furious, but also terrified. I eventually went back inside and searched the house for any evidence that he was there. I was almost starting to doubt myself until I checked the back door. It was unlocked, and the key was still in the door. I never left the key in the door, ever. He'd left through the back while I was hiding across the street. He'd been in my house, and there was nothing I could do about it. I made my way upstairs after properly locking every door. The sick, fringed creak had made my bed. It was perfectly tidy, and the covers and pillows were placed perfectly. He didn't even rush out after I woke up. He just tittied my bed and then left through the back door. I climbed in and tried to fall asleep, but there was an overwhelming musky smell. His unwashed body had tainted my covers, and his odor lingered all over my room. It took me hours to replace all of my bedding and finally get to sleep. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of being violated, but I also doubted the whole night. The police had been inside my house, a bunch of men in heavy uniforms. That could explain the smell, the key being in the back door. Maybe they were checking to see if it was the right key for that lock, confirming that nobody had stolen it. Even the tidy pillows had an explanation. I told them he was in my bed, so it makes sense that they'd throw my bedding onto the floor if they were looking for him. And then maybe one of them just put it back and tidied it up for me. I followed my usual morning routine, and then at 8:30, as I approached my front door, I took a deep breath, anticipating his presence. I left my house and headed towards the road, looking in his direction. As soon as I stepped outside, there he was, walking out of his house to greet me like clockwork. I froze and tensed up, ready to scream or punch him if he got too close. "You're running 3 minutes later than usual. Did you remember to lock your door this time?"